not here, we'll just get the introductions done and then start the actual presentation and the piece that Replicon's going to present. I'll kick things off. So I'm Production Services PMO, Dominic D'Souza, and we've been working with Replicon with respect to a utilization platform for the advertising business globally. So that's the mill and MPC advertising. So that's kind of been why we started talking to Replicon, because we needed a utilization management platform independent of time and attendance, etc. So in our phase one of work, that's what we'll do. We'll implement. That's been signed off by the investment committee, and there will need to be some connection. There'll be a feed from Kronos. There'll be a feed from HR Online, but that's the kind of scope in terms of how it touches HR. What will happen thereafter is we'd like to propose a further streamlining of the user experience that potentially takes on time and attendance as well for advertising. So in those discussions, it came up with Betty and Aude Goulon that, you know, we need to do much more of a deep dive to find out, well, is Replicon really able to deal with time and attendance from a global perspective, as opposed to just doing, let's say, North America. And so there was a deep dive session set up in North America last week with Betty and her team. And as requested, this is the deep dive session for rest of the world. And it's the opportunity for Aude and her team to be able to just see the real platform, ask questions, and really get a sense of what it's like. There's no other expectations other than that. So that's kind of my angle on it. Should we go to Scott next, perhaps?
Yes, and then I will continue my my setup here. My name is Scott Bales. I am the VP of Solution Engineering and Delivery and Enterprise Customer Success. So my teams present the solutions to you. They implement those solutions and then they support them long term. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
My name is Chris Hayter. I'm an account executive based in London. I've been connected with Dominic now for a good 8-9 months, I think, relating to utilisation. And I'm excited in terms of looking at Replicon to open the platform up from a HR perspective.
Shelley Davenport. I run the sales organization for Replicon and have been, the executive sponsor for Technicolor on the utilization side. And excited to be here today to show you what the platform can do from a global perspective. We have a lot of customers doing transformation projects with us to bring it all onto one platform. So,
thank you.
I'm the Human Resources Director at Migros, and so I will follow the implementation of Replicon to evaluate the possibility within French labor law, what we can do, what we cannot do, how to manage it for a good implementation of the tool.
I'm Guillaume Macombe. I'm part of the PSPMO team. I work on some projects on onboarding and induction at the moment.
I'm Luis Fernandez. I'm helping Paul Botlick with various time and attendance projects. And I'm based in Paris, so
I'm Sylvie Chouveau. I'm a HR manager for CSP, Sales Services Manager. Okay. And I would like to discover this application and how we can manage it between the firewall interface and the time and attendance.
Okay. David Olival. So basically, I'm the head of IT for corporate functions, which basically include finance, HR, sourcing, legal.
Okay.
And also the head of IT for one of our key business divisions named Connected Home. And Paul is on my team, Paul Botlick.
Thank you. I'd like to just ask the people on the call as well, if I may, to introduce themselves. And it may be challenging for Nada, I know, but Jimmy and Suresh, could you just give us a quick overview of who you are and where you are?
Hi, this is Jimmy. I head the HR for India, and I have Santosh with me. Santosh.
Hi, this is Santosh. I take care of the operations side of HR for India, and then we have a regional team that supports, UK, Australia, France, and a bit of, cluster around Europe from India.
Thank you. Joe?
Hi, I'm Joe. I'm the head of HR for the UK. I also do some project management for Europe, India and Asia Pacific projects.
Thank you, Joe. Sorry, Ord has just joined us, so that's great. Betty, if you're able to talk, I know that everybody knows you, but just a quick one.
Sure, no problem, Dominique. So I'm Betty Moreno. I'm based in Burbank, California. I currently lead the North America Shared Services Office for Technicolor and Worldwide Compliance.
Thank you. And Nada, are you able to talk? She's on the train, I know, so we'll give her some grace. But Nada,
she's leading the HR operations team for Canada.
Great.
So yeah, so she's responsible for time and attendance for Canada.
Perfect. And finally, Ord.
Yes. Hi. Sorry.
Well, it's great. We were just doing introductions, and so everybody's now gone through their introductions, and you're the boss.
So who did I talk to on the phone? Who is Chris?
It was me. It's Chris. Yeah, nice to meet you.
So I'm leading the HRCC organization worldwide. So I guess you explained, I don't know, but the HRCC is in charge of delivering HR services. We organize by country, and so we're responsible for all HR services, paying people, doing all the administration, transaction. In some countries, we deliver the recruitment, the training, right? So the entire HR suite. And so one of our responsibilities is the compliance, ensuring that we pay people correctly, and so that we track time off and time in of our people as well correctly in line with their local regulations. And voila. So we wanted to understand from you what Replicon can provide. So we have a lot of countries on the line, as you heard. So we have a good mix of countries between Canada, India, UK, France, and well, we have Betty as well, but I know she's already seen it in the US. So these are the biggest countries we have, but of course we have some additional countries, but at least we wanted to start with these countries. We have local solutions for time and attendance in all these countries, for time in and time off, all different solutions per country. So we have ProTime in France, where we do both time in and time off. We have Solus in India. We have time off from SuccessFactors in the UK to track time off. We have, well, we're about to deploy Kronos in Canada. So we have different local solutions integrated with our payroll systems. And we all have different regulations in terms of time and attendance. So we wanted to know what Replicon has to offer in this functionality.
Great. And I should just mention we're recording.
Okay, so I should not say anything stupid. I'll try my best.
Okay, over to you, Scott.
Perfect. Sorry, I'm nabbing Scott's laptop here. Thank you. So Dominic, thanks for the intro. At first, it saved kind of me some time relating to explaining why we're here. I think we can probably jump straight to the agenda. Let me just see if we're sharing here.
Sorry. Bigger.
Perfect. So yeah, just jumping to the agenda, we've obviously done the introductions relating to this session, but the first kind of part of the meeting, we want to kind of explain why we're here, and that's in the form of what we perceive are the main Technicolor objectives from this conversation. We'll then do a couple of quick slides around Replicon, the background of Replicon, to give some perspective on that. And then we'll look at some solution key strengths that really revert back to the reasons why we're here. And then we'll get to the best part at the end, where we hand over to Scott to take a look at the solution. So that's kind of the agenda we're going to follow today. So the first part is really kind of why we're here. And as I say, we've simplified this best we could based upon some detailed conversations I had with Ord and Betty. I believe this is, obviously, as Dominic says, this is the second meeting of 2. And essentially, we've learned that you obviously have certain solutions in place. And the really goal is to kind of maintain that level of functionality, but make it better. And we've kind of articulated this within 6 objectives. So the first one, which we see is critical, is obviously compliance. So from a leave and from a payroll perspective, we need to maintain what compliance you already have within your systems, but also extend that and broaden the coverage and automate even the most kind of taxing and complicated rules within our solution. The next objective, particularly in EMEA, is as Ord mentioned, there's a number of different systems for time. But really coming to what was really prevalent in the conversations was really coming to a single solution for time, a single system of record for time, but satisfying the business needs as well as the HR needs in one single platform. So from what I understand, that's been quite challenging for Technicolor before. So we hope we can show you that on the session today. The next point is around user experience, making sure that the solution is 100% adopted by your organization, modern user interface, intuitive, staying current. It's a massive important point that came across in our discussions. The fourth point is really taking away kind of more of a legacy on-premise approach and bringing in a modern cloud solution and all the associated advantages. And the penultimate point comes around configuration. We're in a global environment. There'll be many different scenarios in countries and departments, many different deviations, and making sure that Technicolor look at a solution that's going to accommodate all of those requirements globally. And now the last objective, which again is very important, is that we've talked about how we can become a system of record, but proving that through our implementation approach. How smooth will it be, the transition period, and how efficient will that change be if Technicolor make that decision? So they're kind of what we perceive you guys want to get out today. Hopefully we've articulated it in sort of the way that you want.
Thanks.
It's getting moody again.
Okay.
Perfect. So we just do a couple of slides now, just relating to a bit of background of Replicon. Some selected points. We have 22 years experience in the TNA segment. We're based in 70 countries and have 1.5 million users worldwide. So there's a few names you'd recognize on this slide. What it really kind of shows is that we're a true enterprise solution. There are a number of different use cases in play for all of these clients. Some have multiple use cases in terms of what we're looking at from Technicolor today. But also the last point really relating to these sorts of names is we've got great referenceability and case study potential.
And for, I would say, most of these cases, it's, I would say, a global platform that you put in place covering all the regions.
Yes, exactly. And it could be a combination, like we're looking at utilization and HR perspective, from a TNA HR perspective as well.
Okay.
So we've obviously talked about the objectives. I wanted to play back really the Replicon platform strengths that relate to those initial reasons of why we're here. So the first one is very important because in terms of discussions we've had, it's been very difficult for Technicolor to find a single solution that will adequately cater for the requirements of the business and HR. So within our platform approach, we're obviously doing a piece of work for utilization at the moment, and we want to look at potentially opening up another strand on the same platform for HR. So as well as kind of opening up different use cases, we can also scale with the organization as well, relating from if you want to add users and grow, we can grow with you from a functionality and a user perspective. The second pillar is around ease of use. I mentioned this is kind of a critical point for us in terms of development of our application. Modern UI, our goal is 100% adoption. and we're dealing with a solution that stays current. So we're not going back to the on-premise days where it stays static, as we have weekly updates and the solution moves with the times. The next point is around configurability. So we also understand that we're supporting a number of different global deviations, different countries, different departments, different timesheets, different approvals, making sure that we have a solution that has the flexibility to deal with all of those scenarios. And what really helps with that is the way that we've architected our solution. We have a lot of scriptable extensibility in the back end. So if we don't have solutions out of the box, we can certainly kind of customize and configure that to suit your needs. And in terms of segregation of data and different use cases, we have lots of configuration around role-based permissions and groups. So we can going back to the point of having a single solution with a number of different use cases. And then the final point, which is again critical, is the compliance side of things. So talking about, we offer compliance of a service. So that includes out-of-the-box statutory state and country libraries. We have the ability to configure custom local agreements on top of those statutory rules. But we also offer a service, an in-house service within Replicon. We have a compliance desk which will make sure that the statutory rules are current and then alert you guys relating to different states or countries if there's an update and when you want to publish that update as well. So we provide a service that allows you to stay current from a statutory perspective. So the last slide here, I just wanted to, I thought was a good representation relating to like a unified platform, and we're delving into another kind of use case relating to Technicolor. And this graphic kind of articulates that pretty well. We're dealing here, first of all, in terms of the sources and collection methods of time. So whether that be iPad, whether it be mobile, whether it be desktop, or even interconnected systems that push data into Replicon, we have the ability to harvest data from all sorts of sources. Then we move into kind of the under the hood Replicon SDK. So all of the intelligence that gets built in relating to the time that feeds through, and all of the logic-based rules that we use under the bonnet within Replicon. And then relating to, if we take Technicolor as an example, we're looking at more kind of utilization from a logging time for projects perspective, so we can associately branch that to the appropriate strand. But also we can use the time coming in and the processing to provide another stream, which is going to be from a HR perspective, time and attendance. So I thought this slide kind of, as a final slide, articulated the way that we can use Replicon and open the platform up for different use cases. But essentially, that was just, before I hand over to Scott, that was just setting the scene. I just wondered, get the feedback from the team whether there's any kind of refinement or objectives, but that's the way we understand what you want to see within the session. Okay. Perfect. So over to you, Scott.
Is there garbage? I just want to. Yeah, that works. Thank you.
Can't see one.
It's okay.
Do you already have customers who use time and attendance, the HR part, worldwide?
Yes.
Yeah. Facebook.
In which countries?
Facebook's got about 35 different countries.
Right. Mix of Europe, America.
Europe, Asia, America, Expedia, mainly in Europe and Asia.
So time in, time off.
Yes.
Right.
Let me go to the next slide. So unfortunately, there are a couple more slides before we get into the product. I'll be brief. I didn't get to introduce myself. I'm Scott Bale, so I manage the implementation and solution engineering portion of Replicon for the enterprise group, and I support our customers from a customer success perspective at the enterprise level as well. Thank you for taking some time today. What I'll cover off specifically here, and I'll start with the BRE overview, which is the Replicon business rules engine. I've got a slide following this that we'll kind of talk to, but it's important that we understand how Replicon is able to accomplish what it does, because I think it's a huge differentiator for us in the market, and it allows us to meet the needs of complex countries like France, and globally deal with out of the box rules built for even tougher geographies like Asia. Oh, sorry, 1 second. I'll talk about our compliance offering and the built-in dashboard in our tool, how we can subscribe notifications out from within the actual product. I'll talk a little bit about the composition of our compliance team at Replicon that services our customers. Once I've done that, I'll go through a day in the life, which is just going to be really an overview of what's possible with the system. There's lots of options. Flexibility is something that you're going to hear from me a lot over the next couple of hours. And that's because your business has different needs depending on the country, depending on the type of employee, maybe even depending on the job they're doing. So Replicon wants to provide a single platform to meet all of those needs. So we'll go through a day in the life, different options. And then after that, we'll go under the covers and look at some of the France, India, UK, and Canada setup that I've put into the system so we can see how Replicon solves for those specific countries. Okay, then we'll wrap with some Q&A, but this is completely interactive. So if you guys have questions that are questions that are specific to what I'm showing at any point in time, stop me. It may sound scripted, but it's not. We can bring your questions and jump right into whatever it is we need to take a look at. So please feel free to do so. So the first item I want to talk about is the, the Replicon Business Rules Engine. So down here at the bottom, we have that time intelligence platform. And that platform is the slide that Chris showed. It's the whole enchilada. It is a system that can be extended, can be customized, can be configured to address all of your time capture needs. That's time work, actuals, forecasts, utilization numbers, project task, distributions, exception time, time off, all in one system, all in one platform. Think about your CRM system, your finance system. This is a time system. That system, obviously data is going to flow in and out of our system through, timesheet interaction, clock interaction. We're going to talk about our clocks and third-party clocks, mobile devices. And before that data comes through and into the platform for storage and processing, it flows through our business rules engine. And that business rules engine allows us to not only provide you with a lot of customizable options or configurable options in this case, but it also allows us to address very specific elements. So if, for example, you have a CBA that is going to pay something over and above the statutory requirement, it isn't custom coding that we have to get into. We can leverage this rule to simply augment an existing rule, tweak an existing rule, add the parameter there, and we'll take a look at the parameters and the setup of that as well. But what's important that we understand is that business rules engine, that layer exists that allows Replicon to deal with the complexities that we're seeing globally. That makes sense?
So does that mean that you have modules for each country which are already built in and we just need to customize them to meet our needs? Yes?
Yes, that is correct.
Right. So we don't build everything from scratch.
You got it.
From a country.
You got it.
All right.
That's correct. And some of those countries we will turn on and they will be great. Some of those countries we will turn on and you will say, hey, we pay higher than the statutory requirement in those locations. And it's not programming. I'll show you what you have access to and what we have access to. And you've understood it perfectly. Okay. So with that, I'm now going to jump into the product and take a look at the compliance dashboard. And I want to confirm everybody online can see what I'm seeing because of that. So this is actually just a demonstration overlay that we're looking at here. You wouldn't see this interface. You would log in, and we'll take a look at what that login screen looks like. But I'm going to go in as an administrative user now. So what I have access to through permissions is administration of all the systems underneath that are driving compliance, driving setup, driving users, etc. And we expose these all to you as a customer. So I'm down here in the pay codes and policies section. And I'm going to open up the compliance dashboard first. So what we have here embedded in the system, and I've got a certain amount of our compliance rules enabled. You can see all the rules that are in effect in the system today. You can see the number of assigned users that are taking advantage of the pay rules that we've defined in the system. Talks about their country, region, etc. And we can sort by any one of these things. You're getting versions of those rules as well, along with a date added and updated. And this status column on the bottom, or on the last column of the table, is actually a representation telling you that that rule is up to date. So as that rule becomes out of date, like we see this one for California is in my system, I can actually acknowledge that it's out of date, look at the change, and accept the update. These rules are applied to users with effective dates. So you'll get these notifications and these updates within the compliance dashboard ahead of time. Then you'll be able to go in, you'll be notified, you'll be able to go into the system, see the compliance update, what it was. Let's open up one here, one for BC. Calculating of holiday pay was now supported in the second version of that. Let's see if there's another one with several revisions. No. Okay. So again, performance enhancement made on October 4th, but you'll see a list and a history and an audit trail of all the changes to the payrolls in this screen. And again, this isn't all of them. We'll see all of them, but this is just the ones that have been enabled in my specific instance. The other tab here at the top, subscriptions, is going to allow you to expose those alerts to individuals within your organization that you want to be notified of those compliance elements. There we go. So right at the top, you can just see a historical alert. I think the latest one that I have in my demo system is a South Korea amendment around equal pay. But down at the bottom is where you set up your compliance subscribers. So you're going to be able to add subscribers in the system to specific compliance updates. In addition to describing who gets that update, you can also tell them which locations they're getting. So your payroll managers that are in North America get the North American updates, Europe, etc. It makes it relevant to them and prevents noise from adding any value to the notices that we're sending out. Okay.
And so you guys implement automatically the new regulations and so on in the tool, and you let your clients know before, or how does that work?
That's right. So as that change occurs, we're notifying you that it's coming. In fact, I believe you'll be notified even before it's supported. So you'll be notified first, then we'll develop support for that specific piece of compliance. You'll log into the system and acknowledge, yes, I acknowledge it's changing. I want it to change on this date. And then it will apply automatically to the users you've indicated. The other situation is a custom CBA, for example. So if you are paying something above the stat pay, in those cases, we'll simply notify you, you'll acknowledge. We won't automatically make the change because now we have to work with you to understand, hey, do you want to continue to pay over stat, or is now stat come up to meet what you're paying? So that's a conversation that we have before we automatically apply anything. But we can do it because even those custom CBA rules that we built in the system have a country associated with them. So even though the rule isn't our out-of-the-box read-only rule, it still has a country associated, so we can tag you if there's an update that has to go out for that specific rule. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So this is the dashboard. This is a kind of a high-level view of all the rules that are in play in the system. The other list I want to take a look at the actual pay rules themselves. And this list is constantly growing. So in this situation, we have what we call a follow the customer model, right? So 5-6 years ago, we had a configurable overtime engine that you could configure and use to capture overtime in North America and parts of Europe. What we realized we needed to do is provide out of the box rules that were already pre-configured. So out of the box today, we've got, I want to say 60 countries. We have all of the US states. We have all of the Canadian provinces. And actually, we've just recently exposed several of the major Indian provinces into the system as well. These are considered compliance library rules. So if I open up one of these, I'm going to choose Alaska, for example. It's a high-level description, daily and weekly overtime. Most of these are very similar. We get some information in the lower left-hand corner about some of the the pay rule details and description of the parameters that are off to the right, but you'll notice everything on this screen is read only. I can't change any of this data. Up at the top, it's telling you this is a Replicon library pay rule. We are owning this rule from a compliance perspective, and as it changes, you'll be notified. We'll update it automatically. So there's nothing for you to do on this rule. That's why you can't edit and change it. If we go back to that pay rules screen, that doesn't mean that we don't allow for that rule to be configurable. So if I, for example, decided to go into,
if you take France or India, do you have it?
Yeah, we'll go into those one sec. Here is Argentina. Again, a lot more parameters, a lot more complexity involved in Argentina. Again, still read only. We can look at France. Again, so France pay rules, night premium hours, definition of what those are by legal stat, include time off, regular time. This is a code within our system, regular weekly overtime. This is really drives, where do we put all of that time that we've distributed? We've got a pay code description here that talks about how we're going to divide up the time from a pay code perspective. And I'm not gonna read all of these things. The information driving this.
To make sure I understand, so these are the rules that you are referring to by country, to make sure that this is in line with that we do not need to rebuild from scratch what is in place today.
You got it.
Okay.
So in this case, let's say we identified something in this rule that wasn't going to be, it was going to match what Technicolor is doing. In that case, we would simply add a new pay rule. We can bring that French rule over, but this is our kind of our default international pay rule.
Okay.
So now I've got editable items that I can put in my own values for.
And this is not code programming, this is what you're referring to earlier on. It's something that we can customize.
These are the parameters that I'm referring to that you can change. Behind this, there's actual coding that you could change if you wanted to as well, but most times we would change the coding if we needed to. We can also add new parameters here. If there was a parameter that you wanted to be able to tweak, we can add that here as well.
And after how it works, because when you are going to, and I'm sure that you're going to go to that, when you are going to publish new releases of the solution with new enhancements, etc., there is also some non-regression testing that is being done, because if we are going to do some specific configuration, we need to ensure that this is not going to impact.
So what you'll have access to, what we do with all of these changes, that we regression test all of the automatic all the automatic items, but we also provide you with a sandbox. So and you'll have access to those rules before they're live. So what we're actually able to do is do a payroll run with the old rule, do a payroll run with the new rule, and we can compare the results.
Knowing that the goal is to have a minimal, I would say, customization to be performed.
Of course. Custom is a terrible word for us. Terrible word.
Is it possible to divide the rules by the entity? Because sometimes in the same country we can have completely different rules to applicate payroll between, for example, in these sites, you have two French companies and they are completely different.
Yes. Don't assume that because I have one French payroll, that's the only French payroll you can have. You could take that French payroll and replicate it 150,000 times and change it differently for each one, and then apply it to the different groups that need to have it applied to. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Okay. And again, we'll look into how this is how it looks in the administration screen. We'll look how it looks from a user perspective as we get into the system a little further. Okay. Any questions on compliance or pay rules before we get into kind of a day in the life scenario of actually accessing the system? Yeah. Okay.
I had a quick question. Sorry.
Go ahead, Dominic.
You mentioned that you'd recently got some regions in India. Which are those that you've already got?
That's a great question. Thank you, Dominic. One moment. So that's a great question. All I have to do here is go country, India, not the British Indian. Yeah, there you are. These are the recently supported states, and I think Delhi, I don't know if the state or city rule that we put in the system. The actual, we did this because the actual country definition for India is pretty light. It's really they delegate to the states for a lot of their compliance definitions. So we've made the decision to support the states here as well. Nobody's asked the question, what if there's a country we're not in? So I'll answer the question. So if you come to us with my favorite recommendation of the Congo, I'll have to find a new country and once we start supporting it. But in the event that you come to us and say, hey, we have an organization of users in the Congo, we need to support them from a client compliance perspective. With a follow the customer model, we take the compliance team that's monitoring the existing countries. We source rules and legislation from the new country that you want to support. Obviously, this isn't a, hey, we're going to support this tomorrow, but over the course of a normal implementation timeline, we can usually source that information and have that rule developed as part of the implementation. It then becomes part of the library going forward. So you're not in a custom payroll to address the Congo in that situation. We have simply expanded our library for you, and we'll monitor the Congo going forward if that's a country we need to support.
Can you create a payroll from scratch? Or you have to replicate one?
No, we can create it from scratch, a blank slate, whatever
So
it is.
someone in company can just do it without asking.
That's right. That's right. And so we're constantly kind of evaluating where we want to go from a market perspective, and the compliance team is creating. This is a great example of that. The customers that we're talking to said, "Hey, we have some provincial or state rules in India. Can you guys look at those things?" So we prioritize it, and this is a result. Your question?
No,
Are you guys okay? I know you guys all have other things that you're trying to do, so I appreciate that.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dominic. Let me now log out and talk about the start of the workflow. And I heard, I've heard from Chris as we've heard from lots of other customers and Betty when we were in Burbank last week. There's lots of use cases here. You have situations where users are going to be clocking in from a device. You're going to have situations where users are today putting time in on a keyboard at the computer. And you may have situations where they're putting in just 8 hours a day. And it's that all week, every week. So we've got different solutions for all of those things. And if we think about maybe new devices that we can bring to the table, we have mobile devices sitting in our pockets that are going to accomplish that very easily. We have a tablet solution that we'll talk about as well. So we'll start here on a laptop and check out what that experience would look like. With single sign-on, users will just click a link and be dropped into the application. We can also provide them with a login page as well for users that might not be on your network. So they wouldn't click a pretty picture of somebody on a page to log in, but I am, because I have that user already set up. And this is a clock in and a clock out user, right? So the clock in and clock out user really has the most options out of everybody, because they can use any of the devices that we bring to the table. They can use a laptop where they log in and they've got a very simple interface where they say, I'm clocking in, I'm choosing a distribution. We've got a distribution called activity here. That is not written in stone. You define what those distributions are. You can have 1, 2, 10, however many you need the user to define. That list of distributions that I see is specific to me. We can also add validations around those distributions. So if it's 2 or 3 they have to choose and they can't choose, one if they choose another, we validate that. We'll talk about validations a little bit as well. That's part of the business rules engine as well, and I didn't mention it.
But
so
that can, sorry to interrupt, that can be an HR point of view, because from an HR standpoint, a lot of time I don't care what people have been doing. I just need to know have they been working or potentially some lunch breaks. But I don't need to know if they've been on meetings.
For sure.
Sometimes I'm not even allowed to ask them, right? Because we have people paid on a daily basis.
Sure.
Not an hourly one, so they can work 6 hours, 10 hours, it's not my problem. So is that okay here to have something very simple, even if the business later on wants to allocate all this time to projects from an HR standpoint, I can keep it simple?
Yeah, so from an HR standpoint, I'm going to show you a lot of things that are possible. They're also possible to be removed. Okay. That activity distribution absolutely doesn't need to be there. It's something we can enable for groups, enable later, if at all. Okay. Yep. Almost everything that we're going to see throughout today is permission based, and we'll talk a little bit about permissions, but it can be shown or hidden depending on the user. So I'm going to go ahead and save that, and that's going to create a punch for me from this computer, my local device. I can close my browser at this point. I've punched in. I may or may not have permissions to edit that. We may or may not round that value. Again, these are all things that are set up during the configuration and implementation, but that's my user experience. I log in, I click a button, done. Very simple, very easy. The complexity may come in as users move between different roles. Maybe from an HR perspective, you only care about work and break. If we may care about what they're doing from a pay perspective, they may be paid differently depending on what they're doing. Transfer is very simple to facilitate that, and break is, of course, them saying, I'm going for my rest break or my meal break, and capturing that in the system for rules requirements. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, all of these punches, I'm just looking at one day, December the 12th. All of my punches will show up here, and I think I do another clock out and see if it registers. There's my clock in and my clock out, obviously very close in duration. But as the user is punching in and out through the day, those punches are also flowing to a timesheet. And this next tab here is my timesheet as a user. At any point during the week, I can go to the timesheet tab, and I can see all of my punches for the week historically. Okay.
Can I put some punches by default? So instead of punching in and out, can I just put 8 hours for everyone? And at the end of the week, they just come and commit that they've worked 8 hours and only add overtime if needed, yeah?
Yes, we'll see another timesheet format that facilitates that perfectly. Great question.
And that can be linked to a badging system, right? So the clock-in, clock-out.
That's right. We can use an existing badging system. We can use an existing clock system. We can use our badging system as well. This yellow bar at the top is something that's common across all the timesheets. This is a validation message. So in this case, it's validation. It's validating a meal break or a rest break violation that hasn't happened, as it should on this timesheet. It's notifying me, the user, that it hasn't happened. That same validation we'll see when the supervisor logs in. We'll also have visibility into that exception, and it can be configured to validate things over and above rest break. As I mentioned, out of the box, we're validating meal breaks, we're validating rest breaks, validating adherence to schedules, validating if they're punching out too early, etc. And then again, parameters drive this, so you can tweak those, or we can develop whole new rules, to your point, validation rules that apply only to Technicolor. Okay. This user also has time off, but I'll talk about time off separately because that interface is similar for both. But let's imagine that user actually using a mobile device to do that same thing. All right. I'm in a Zoom, in a team, in a Zoom. So
another video conferencing tool.
Bear with me.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm now on my mobile device. I'm simply going to go to the Replicon app up here and click into it. You can see it's notifying me immediately. There's 16 things outstanding. I think they're timesheets. So I'm now in the application. Down at the bottom. Oh, let me move that.
Oh, is that, yeah.
I think it's me. Down at the bottom, you can see my capabilities. It really says timesheets, time off, and settings down there. But this interface is now prompting me to clock in, and I can go ahead and clock in by simply pressing the clock in button. It's going to take a picture of me. We're going to say, hey, that's pretty good. That's as good as it gets, actually. But I'm going to accept that punch, and it's now in the system, and it's starting to count. It's giving me real-time information about the fact that I punched in. Now, the fact that I've used my my mobile device, I can see all my historical punches, and you see those down the list. But when I get to this punch, the fact that I use my mobile device, we've got more information there now, right? It says it was mobile. It says exactly where I was when I punched in. So now not only can we validate things like schedule and validate maybe the distributions you've selected, but I can also say, hey, Scott, what are you doing in Paris today? Like, you're supposed to be in California right now and you're trying to punch in for work from Paris. So, yeah, or that doesn't look anything like you, Scott. And so we'll see, the manager actually sees those levels of detail as well. Now, you're not limited to time from the mobile device. Time off that we're going to take a look at in more detail in the browser is available here as well. Balances, your requests can be made right from this device, your holiday calendars, etc. And we'll see that in a little more detail through the browser. Okay, that's the second option that they have. So if I stop sharing that now.
And to your point, Ord, is that you wouldn't track people you mentioned, is that right? So we can disable that as well.
Countries we can't really do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Even take the picture, that's not going to go down.
Again,
in a lot of places.
Again, disabled and not necessary. Let me stop sharing.
The only one case I could think of is HES Logistics, right? Or they might be moving things around.
Well, it depends. If it's a professional smartphone, we can probably impose to use the localization
Right.
functionality.
Yes.
If it's a personal one, we're not going to be able to force people to localize.
No, of course not. Yes, if you have a bring your own device policy, it's going to be tricky to enforce that on the phone. The tablet option that these users have is what we would call our cloud clock device. So now, Chris, can you stand up for a sec? Chris is my clock stand. I figured this out at a customer site the other day with another sales rep. So I found a use for sales reps. So this device is mounted on wall. Those of you that here, look at it, stand in front of the camera. Those of you see a little video, Chris is holding up a tablet on the wall. He's my tablet guy. So this is going to be mounted on the wall. It's going to replace all those $7,000 Chronos clocks that you lease for 200,000 years and they break and they have to come out and replace them and it's a mess. So this is going to be stand on the wall. People are going to walk up to that device. Where's my camera? They're going to walk up to that device with a QR code. That QR code is going to identify them. Then they're going to get all the options that they had in the browser. That same guy that was punching on his phone, punching in the browser, now come in and go ahead, clock out right from the device. Okay, he's not limited to that. So if you have users that maybe aren't smartphone or computer savvy people, they don't have laptops, maybe fabrications in emerging markets, you can actually do all of your timesheet. You can see your timesheet, you can see your time off all from this location as well. So it serves as more than a clock. It's a service device that you can augment with the functionality that you want to augment. So thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Well done, sir. That was great. You're better than my last guy. So again, that's really an example for a day in the life of a punch user from multiple interfaces. Replicon wants you capturing that time anywhere, any place. So we're enabling you to do that across your devices. Now let me see what's showing. Now coming back to the browser, that was great for punches. But to your example, listen, can I just put 8 hours in a day and have them click and submit that? So if I go look at entering daily hours, before we get to the last one. So now entering daily hours, I've selected an activity here, again, not required, but this timesheet was actually pre-populated originally with 8 hours across. And what I'm able to do with that pre-populated timesheet is come in at the end of the week and say, I submit, I could submit it up here for approval. And once I submit it for approval, there's notifications that are sent, but we can also have an attestation here that says, I hereby declare that this is an accurate representation of my hours. I click the submit button, and then that would go on to an approver. Or again, I tweak it, I make changes. Something that we believe in is minimizing your contact with the timesheet. If we can pre-populate this from different systems that you have today, then we want to give you as much of a pre-populated timesheet as possible. Your calendars have this data, security card systems have this data, your predefined schedules have this data. So we want to load it here and take advantage of that if we can. I know we've already kind of talked with the utilization group about bringing in as much as possible to make this an easy to use experience. Okay.
And so if I add more than the standard hours of the week, how does it show here that it's overtime request?
Great question. And I don't know if this user has an overtime rule set up, but I do have one that is. Let me see if this user has an overtime rule defined for them. And I don't think they do because I put a lot of hours here and it's not calculating, but that's fine. We'll go to a user with an overtime. There we go. Actually, there was some overtime calculated. So down at the bottom now, I just forced a recalculation. You don't have to actually do that, but the system breaks that down, tells you how much was double time, how much was overtime, how much was regular. The dollars are there because we've included the rates, not a requirement. A lot of customers say, hey, I don't want the rates there. Just tell me what's the hours breakdown. And users see that updated real time. We'll see the supervisor has the same view of that, and they can use that to classify which timesheets they want to drill into and approve or inspect because there's way too many overtime hours, for example. Okay. The last user experience, the last end user experience that I'll take a look at, and we're looking at week durations of all of these. That doesn't mean that you have to enter weekly timesheets. You define that duration for every individual, every group within the system, and it's really up to you how frequently you want to gather that time for those specific groups. So here's the third generic capture mechanism. Again, now I'm capturing specific start and stop times. I refer to this as our honor-based in and out system because now I'm, as a user, entering those start and stop times, but it's not hard-coded in the system. So I'm physically putting in, I started at 8, I went to 12, I took a break at 12, 12:30, etc. So again, not a hard punch. This is more of a white collar interface where we need to actually capture these hours. Australia is a good example where this is becoming more prevalent. Spain is another example where hours need to be captured, specific hours, but they're not people that are going to be punching a clock. Okay. All right. Are there any, as you think about the time capture mechanisms across your countries that you're dealing with, are there any unique interfaces that aren't covered by one of these? Come to mind?
Nada, Santosh for India, Canada? Santosh?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a bit of an echo, but it's his end that's causing.
Oh, it's his speakers. Yeah.
Go ahead, Santosh.
All right. In India, the current system we use is completely automated. So there is no physical punch in, or rather on the system that any artist or any employee has to punch in their in and out time. It's completely captured from their badges. All the doors that are available in our building have been coded into our leave and attendance system to automatically capture production in and production out time. So when they just badge out for lunch, it just knocks off the hours for the time they spend outside in the cafeteria or outside in the production floor.
Yep.
It also automatically captures the extra hours that somebody is spending in. So all of that is now currently done by only the employee having to badge in and badge out. Not necessarily having to go in and manually punch in anything.
And we have customers that take advantage of that as well. We may be doing that at our Bangalore office, actually. So they're all keying in and out of the office as they come and go. And we can take those punches and feed them into the system the same way I suspect you're feeding them into your existing system there. So that would be a very easy transition for us. And we can actually auto-submit timesheets as well. So we talked about a user attesting to the hours. We can actually auto-submit these timesheets for review by some approver down the path without the user interacting at all. Okay.
And then we have custom rules set up to capture the attendance because we have a policy that somebody would have to be in the office for at least 8 hours to get a full day's attendance. So all of that is auto-calculated, and then the attendance gets populated depending on the badge in and badge out time. So all of that is configurable in this, including the leave customization and the time off customization.
Okay. And then that attendance piece, is that just confirming they attended X number of days? Are you using that for pay calculations at all, or is it just stored for performance review, or what are you doing with that attendance data?
We use it for pay calculations.
Pay calculations. Okay. Okay. So we actually would use that same logic in our pay rule for those locations that says, hey, if a user has been here more than 6 hours, then consider this an attendance day, pay them for that day if it's a daily rate. I would also indicate is when we turn that on for you, we make that 6 hours a day a parameter, so that as it's going to change, if your policies change, it's not a change request to Replicon and thousands of dollars of programming. It's somebody administratively is able to go in and tweak those values. Okay. So this is the end user experience from tablet to.
Oh, sorry. So Nada,
yeah. Go ahead.
Nada, are you in the office or are you still in your train? Nada?
I'm not seeing.
So Paul, maybe you know a bit for Canada now that you're an expert in Canada time and attendance.
Sure. Well, yes. Hi, everybody. I've been on for a while. I just didn't want to interrupt. Yeah. So, what was the specific question with regards to Canada? Just is this covering everything, or
yeah,
what?
Yeah.
Yes.
Or do you have
yes.
other functionalities that you would need, or for time? We're on time in for the moment. We're going to look at time off afterwards. Yes. I can see, but
understood. Yeah. I think the most complex thing that we'd run into, and we discussed last Thursday, is as they like to call it, the CBA, collective bargaining agreement calculations. That's probably as complex as it gets. I don't know if anybody else on the call, if it's applicable to them. Does anybody else have like labor contract rules that get more complex than what we're seeing here?
In France, I don't know if we have anything more complex than what we've seen here. I don't think so. For time in, not for time in. Yes, it's more for time off. So
got it. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, well, for Canada, they're having problems where entering tasks.
Okay.
They call them tasks.
Yep.
It's hard to see the description of the task.
Oh, got it.
I'm sure.
Right, rather than in and out, that collect the hours per task. And good point, Luis. Yeah. So does anybody else deal with integrating tasks in their system and assigning hours per task and tracking that, or is it purely time in, time out?
no, not for the moment, Paul.
Okay. Yeah. So I would say that yeah, those are the two things that are different in Canada: the hours per task and the rules of collective bargaining. And I see Betty's on too. Betty, is there anything else that you see differently or beyond the basics here?
So the one item from Canada to call out, I don't remember seeing it in the US review, but may be very simple. Nevertheless, I'll ask the question. So Scott, we have individuals who, of course, only capture hours, right? The time in and time out for the start of the day, meals, and then at the end of the day aren't as relatable in Canada and any province for the moment. Maybe Toronto will be the first to adopt, but we have employees that, again, capture the number of hours to tasks, assigned to tasks, and the total for the day may be 13.5 hours, but the pay is set for the day, right? They're capturing hours for tasks, not for pay, because the pay is leveled 8 hours. So how does the system manage that, differentiating the number of associated hours to task versus pay?
That's a good question. So what the system is able to do during its payroll calculation is, let me see if this user has a distribution. So in this distribution, we're taking all of the 100% of the hours, 39 and a half of them, and allocating them to different pay codes. What we would likely do from a pay perspective is allocate those 8 hour, allocate hours totaling what their daily total was to pay codes that are processed for payroll, and allocate the remainder to a pay code that is not processed for payroll. So essentially what you would have is, for example, if this was the breakdown on this payroll summary, we might have 39 and a half hours. Let's say that's their total hours you want to pay based on 8-hour days. Maybe it's 40 hours, right? And then you have another line item here that would say additional task time, for example. And we would never process additional task time from a payroll perspective. But you could run hours against tasks through reporting if you needed to distribute those for cost.
Yeah, Scott, just to interrupt for a sec, I think it's the other way around to what Betty's referring. Like, for instance, if they work any beyond 40 hours, they get paid for 44, let's say. I mean, so it's kind of the other way around. Like there'd be more pay if they hit a certain threshold rather than it being a non-pay pay code.
Well, we have both of those scenarios, right, Paul? So it wouldn't be any
Right.
different than a scenario where, you know, Scott, I meet the exemption, right? So I'm not paid overtime. I'm not eligible for overtime.
Right.
But on any given week, I don't know, I may work 60 hours,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
I am logging all of those hours, 60 hours associated to a task, but at the end of the day, it's fixed to payment of 40 hours. And the simple answer may be, you know, the payroll system has to dictate that and manage the maximum. Okay, but I was just wondering how that works in the system in the feed to payroll.
Yeah, we actually would, I'm thinking of some payroll offerings, they're auto-paid their salaried hours, and we're not including them in the salary export except for their time off or exception time.
Okay.
Because we can include or disclude specific pay codes. That's just one off the top of my head.
Yeah,
way we would
that's exactly what we would need. So typically in France, it's the same. We have some exempt people.
Yep.
We don't track their hours.
Yeah.
But potentially the business will want to track their hours, what tasks they've
Right.
done. And even if they enter 60 hours,
Yep.
We don't care. We're going to pay them the same,
Yeah,
right? So
the
it's very
normal rate.
important that
Yeah.
even though we're tracking their utilization and their time on projects, that doesn't have any impact on
Right.
what they get paid, right? So,
Correct.
Okay.
And the other option, thinking out of the box, is that we have the payroll summary simply show 40 hours in the payroll summary, and the timesheet will have 60, 70, whatever it is.
Okay. And is it possible to pre-populate? So we mentioned before, so we can have a standard pre-population. So I pre-populate 40 hours because that's my standard hours.
Yep.
People only come if they have more hours.
Yeah.
Is it possible to pre-populate on an individual basis? So typically I have some people working and I know I want them to come in and work for 42 hours or for 36 hours. Can I pre-populate on an individual basis and even maybe on a weekly basis? I know I'm bringing in this person on payroll next week to work 36 hours or 42, and I want to pre-populate to ensure that they don't enter more or less. Is it possible?
So to answer your first question, there's a couple in there. Yes, we can pre-populate on an individual basis. In fact, you can even make it the user's choice. They can actually say, hey, pre-populate my timesheet with my scheduled hours or my previous timesheets hours. There's lots of options, and we can even customize that pre-population. But preventing them from changing it.
Well, yeah, they can, but I guess there is an approval there from manager. Yeah.
You got it.
And can we have some warnings? So for example, if someone enters more than 48 hours, which is the maximum allowed, then they get a warning saying, you know.
So these warnings at the top are stackable. We're seeing one based on a meal break issue, but any validation that you turn on for this timesheet, that's one of the maximum hours would show up here to the user and to the supervisor.
Joe, maybe. Oh, sorry, Santosh, go ahead.
Sorry, I have a question. So we run a fairly complex business here in Bangalore because we are an amalgamation of all the studios of Technicolor here in Bangalore, and each of them have their own rules and working patterns and schedules. For example, one of the legal entities that we manage does a 20-hour window a day, and they run 3 schedules in a day, which crosses across a calendar day. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And then we have people who need to be slotted into these 3 schedules for schedule adherence.
Yep.
How does the system support us in terms of performing a schedule? For example, I have 300 people who need to report in at 8 in the morning, another 300 at 3 in the evening, another 300 at 10 in the evening. And then for the guys who report in at 10 in the evening, their clock out time will be the next calendar date. So how will the attendance be captured for them? Because it is cutting across 2 calendar days.
Excellent question. So I suspected this question would come up. Turned on our manage shifts user here so we can take a look at, first of all, again, a couple of questions there. I'll address the first. So here's how we deal with schedule adherence items. So we have scheduling functionality built into the product that you define shifts and attributes in the system, starts and stop times, and then you take those shifts and apply them to specific individuals, either visually by manipulating the schedule on an ad hoc basis, or we can preload the schedule information if it's coming from another system. And then Replicon just serves as a storage medium for schedules, okay? Are those schedules stored in an HRIS system today, Santosh, or are they in another third-party system, or are they in your time system?
So currently the system that we use is a third-party system, and then we have developed a shift pattern on it similar to this. So we've created a shift, and then each of them gets tagged to a particular shift. And then when they log into their user interface, it shows them on their schedule for the next week and for however long. Then we've also done it in such a way that because we need to have people rotating shifts, so the system automatically rotates their shifts. So at intervals of every 2 weeks, a guy would move from shift A to shift B. At the end of 2 weeks, he would move from shift B to shift C and then come back to shift A at the end of every 2 weeks. So it's something that we have designed and configured so that nobody has to manually go in and pull and keep updating shifts for an individual.
Good. So hearing about that automatic shift rotation, my advice would be to continue to use that system if it's viable. Replicon will serve as a storage mechanism and leverage the storage of those schedules to calculate things like adherence, generate validation warnings that Scott punched in early. We can even have punch warnings from our devices that say, hey, Scott, you're punching in early, create an exception. That exception flows to a manager for notification. And also use those shift timings for pay calculations. If this probably isn't your situation, Santosh, but if you define on-call shifts and you have users that are on call, we can use that shift definition to pay them a premium because they were on call, even though they didn't create any actuals for hours inside of their timesheets. Okay. Is getting data out of that system, Santosh, possible today? I suspect it is.
Yeah, I mean, I do get a lot of reports of the current system. Just on the shift mapping, Scott, you said that, we create the shift and then we drag it or move the person into it. So if I have to do it for 400 people at a stretch, is there something that like an upload is available, or is it?
There's an Excel schedule management function that you could take advantage of. We also have an interface if you're moving over relatively small groups of sub-users within the system. You could take advantage of kind of a built-in mass edit interface.
Right.
For your scope, I would recommend Excel, but again, I think what I'm hearing is that the source of schedule changes will be your third party you have today, and we'll use synchronization to simply store that here, at least at first blush.
Well, yes and no, because if we have to keep our current third provider, there is no really point in adding another system, right? So, but it's Solus in that you're referring to, Centosh, which keeps all the different shifts.
Solus
Yes, Solus. Yeah.
Oh, so it is the payroll
It is
system.
a time
Oh,
system.
then
So the point is not to
let's
keep
find
the system, right? So
okay, I
we
agree.
need to rebuild that in there somehow. So
Let's find a way then to leverage this. I assume another third-party system. So I
Perhaps you're thinking like for CETA,
yeah,
you know,
no,
that kind of thing.
So I know we're talking more about HR time allocation here, but can you show us, so if I'm allocating time to tasks, can you show me, is that the same interface you showed it before with the activity? So imagine I have to enter, I spend 2 hours on this project, 3 hours on this project. So can you show me, is it drag and drop? Do I have to add a new, how do I say I spend 2 hours here, 2 hours there?
Sure. Let's let me go in as those. This is scheduling, so this isn't my individual user allocated. Okay. So let me go back in as that person. So
I ask that because one of our business has developed a system where it's just a very simple drag and drop. So all the projects or tasks that they can add time to is on the left, and they can drag and drop easily. So I'm just wondering what the activity, what it looks like here.
This is the smallest of activities I have associated with this user to indicate, hey, there's a block of time. It was 8 to 12. I did hiring. Or this could be a project. It could be a task. In the afternoon, I did something else.
Okay.
And I could do that throughout my day. I would probably.
And how do I add a new allocation?
Work time.
Okay. Yeah, so it's not drag and drop. Okay.
To 9 p.m.
So it's really one by one. You have to enter hour by hour what you
right. Now there is another timesheet that simply says put in your punches at the start of the day, and at the bottom we have to show this to Betty and Paula as well. I think as an outcome of the previous is called a distribution timesheet. In that situation, my punches are at the top, my ins and outs are at the top, and at the bottom, it's simply saying, hey, you've got 9 hours today. How do you want to distribute 9 hours across these 4 projects? I think that's probably the interface that's going to make the most sense. We're going to get a break at some point. Let me quickly configure it then and come back and show you, because I don't want to, I think Betty should see that as well.
So before we move to time off, Joe, any question or any comment for the UK?
Nothing from my side. All good at the moment.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
All right, good.
Sorry. I do have questions.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. I just thought we were on a moment. So, for if you have like 100 tasks, how do you search? Do we have just a drop line?
I'll configure. There is this is actually searchable, but I will MET. But if you had thousands, like we have customers with tens of thousands, there's actually an alternate interface. I can show you that. You're choosing a hierarchy then, right? You're choosing a project, task, subtask, subtask, and you can search the whole thing from one view.
Yeah,
so we'll take a look at that too.
A lot of the tasks that we have, they have a code that doesn't mean anything.
Again,
and
all
description.
Go to ours.
Play both one, the other.
I need to check. We can, of course, we have 2 fields separately as well.
Right.
What we may do is recommend naming the code as the code dash.
So over here you're showing the code, not the description.
This is actually showing the name of the activity. We have another field behind this that is the code that we would use for processing.
No, that's good.
We would just name them with the code as well to make them searchable.
And just expanding what Paul was talking about, we have some payrolls in Canada where they need a weekly guarantee, not just a shift, but a weekly. A
weekly
guarantee that, for example, anyone that works up to 40 hours, they automatically get 44. Or it could be 41, 42, 43.
Okay.
Any of those, they get paid 44.
Oh, so it's like I think that's
guarantee, but it's the week.
Right. I think it's the reverse of what we were talking about. If they were
if
they were over 44, they would get normalized down to 44. But you're saying if they work over 40 and less than 44, they get 44.
That can be built into the payroll
Exactly.
interface now. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right, if they work 39, they don't get the full.
Yeah, that
Is
logic
it
is
configured?
exactly.
Yeah, it can be built into the payroll interface, but I think the optimal that Nada was, seeing if we could do some way in terms of showing that to the employee as well, not just have it be behind the scenes. But yeah.
Question. Great point, Paul. And again, we have full capability in this payroll summary window. Like, we can add hours here. If they've got 41 hours, we can add supplemental hours here. So this is 44 and they can see that here. So we have full capability from a payroll perspective to manipulate this payroll summary data to reflect what we needed to reflect.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That was the question. Yeah. So you have both directions if you need to put non-pay codes or additional pay codes that are outside of the actual hours worked. Okay.
That's right. That's
very
right.
good.
Yep. Okay.
I have one question too.
Go ahead.
Production perspective.
Okay.
The supervisor needs to track the time per task as well. Is there a way to get that information and insert it in Replicon as a globalized daily amount of time, and that the user would end up validating,
yes.
for example?
So that's a good question. So we would take that as a feed, just like we would take maybe a calendar or a badging system. Santosh is going to send us, the badging punches. Yeah. We'll take the feed that you have with this task list per user identified, and we can pre-populate the timesheet with that data as well, including hours if you happen to know the hours that you would want them validating when it comes into the system. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Any other timesheet questions for me?
This is a little more technical. Is it easy to interact with the database and to put like some kind of interface on top of it?
Great question. The database is behind our API, but all of these fields are exposed through a bidirectional API that's documented on our website. So easy is a relative term. The API is there if you're familiar with that, and you can extract all of these fields through the API.
Can you call them from that screen? Like a link to create them to bring another screen?
It would be on. We support. We actually support hyperlinks from an OEF perspective. So bang.
Parameters maybe, so that you don't have to log in again. Or
I need to get back to you. I need to confirm that, but I think so. I don't think there's a limitation on. I don't think, unless there's some security, risk that I don't know of that prevents parameters on a URL. But I think yes. Let me follow up.
Yeah, and also we're going to do Dominic scheduled a technical deeper dive later, so we should probably hold off on any more technical questions till later. But very good.
The forward shop.
Yeah. Okay, let's step in now as a time off user, and the time off experience is the same for all users that are accessing the system. The things that will change will be work days, holiday calendars, the time off types that are available to them. Let me actually log in as, I think, French user. Still technical. So what I've done with this French user, I've kind of taken the statutory time off types, I've added them to the user profile, and given him permission to book time off. Obviously, there's no history for this user of their accruals that have happened over the last year, as most users would have. But let's look at what that time off experience is. I'm zoomed in a little bit, so it looks good on the screen. On most of your monitors as a user accessing this from a laptop, you would see the full calendar. Again, I'll remind everybody that you could do this from your mobile device, because people aren't thinking about their time off necessarily while they're at work. They're out and about, or they're home with their significant other, and they're being told they're taking their time off.
Stupid question, I hope.
You've never asked a stupid question.
The French user is going to see all of that in French, right?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry. Like, if I put this in French, I won't know where I'm going. So I left it in English, but yes, the system is presented in language choice of the user. They can choose to see it in French, Czech, one of 20 other languages, or they can choose to see it in English. Okay. Yes, they would see it in the language of their choice. So across the top, I'm getting real-time stats on what my balances are for a specific time off type. Here I've got forensic adoption leave is my default for whatever reason. France annual leave, I've got 30 days in my balance. I wish I had 30 days of leave. That's the starting leave in France, I think. If I want to see, you know, I can see a listing of all my balances as well. Now, one thing I really love is the fact that it tells me all my current balances of all my time off types. And I don't know if this is much a problem in EMEA as it is in North America, but the first question an HR person gets is, how much time off do I have left? That's the first question they get. And then when you give them the answer, they go, no, that's wrong. I have way more time off than that. Now in France, I don't think that's possible, but but I saw sick time the other day. You guys only have 90 days of sick time allowed a year. But the next question is, no, that amount is wrong. And then HR people, generalists, spend, you know, an hour trying to explain to them why their balance is what it is, reconciling all the time off they've taken, where they are in the year. The system here is actually going to give them a balance history, right? It's going to give them almost a bank account transaction statement that shows, hey, you accrued. Any time off they've taken would also show up on this list. And that screen that we're looking at, thank you.
Thank you, Anita.
No problem. That screen is presented to the user for them to play with and look at specific date ranges if they want to see what it was last year. They have access to that screen. HR doesn't have to deal with any of those questions anymore. So I love that screen. I assume those questions come up here as well. Back to the time off tab. Booking it couldn't be easier. I simply click and drag across days on the calendar and I let go. If I cross weekends or I cross days off or I cross holidays, the system is going to automatically calculate how many days I'm booking off, what happens after this booking, how much I'll have left, and then give me a summary of the current year up to the end of 2019. It even tells me who's approving it. Now, I also have the option of taking less than a full day. I haven't configured this time off type to allow for it, but these could even be down to granularity of quarter-hour increments. Some of the FMLA requirements in the United States require a 10-minute increment leave. Comments here visible. We could also add other user-defined fields or notes to the user if there's specific text related to this time off type that talks about policies, etc. We can add that to the screen, and we can even add upload links. So doctor's notes, supporting documentation that you want to upload to this screen, we can facilitate that here, and it's a one-stop shop. Okay. Now, this calendar that we're looking at is a shared calendar. So I will not only see my time off requests, but from a visibility perspective, depending on how you set up the system, the user can choose to see additional users. Maybe they want to see their team. Maybe they want to see the entire company. Obviously, they wouldn't want that. But as I select additional groups, I now see that, hey, Richard Anderson is taking time off Thursday through 17th of next week. I don't know what he's taking it off for. I don't know if it's vacation. I don't know if it's just an out of office, but I know Richard Anderson is not going to be available. That's great because it tells me don't bother booking time off with Richard because he's already booked it off. It could tell you the status as well if you wanted the system to do that.
Okay. Excuse me. So Joe, didn't this come up in the UK where SAP SuccessFactors couldn't do it, then they wanted to be able to see across department?
Yes, Dominic, it did.
Right. That's the only time I've heard of that, but it was a big deal.
And can you set it up so that you cannot see it?
So
because visibility is great, but it's not always willed. So
Yeah.
wanted. Sorry, I was looking.
So I believe.
So for my direct reports, N-1, -2, -3 for
Right.
sure.
Right.
Maybe for my teammates, but
Yep.
do I want to see, you know, the vacation or the days off of everyone around the location? I'm not sure, right?
So this is something that they're evaluating how to address. They may have already addressed it. You can choose not to see certain groups. You can choose to set up the system to only see your direct reports. Years gone by, what they've said is, do we need to prevent people from adding users to a shared calendar because they can just get up and see that that person isn't
It's
here?
possible for us to decide as a company who can see what. I'm not asking about a user deciding for himself or herself.
Right.
I'm asking for us as a company.
I know,
to
and
decide what people can see.
I'm telling you that I don't know if we've locked that down yet. So I need to follow up. I need to get.
So the way it's built today, you can see anyone's days off as long as they're on Replicon.
Correct.
So I can see the US days off of anyone if I want to, as a French person.
Let me confirm.
Okay.
So we do have functionality. So we do have groups functionality, which allows you to segregate the product from an administrative perspective. Let me confirm that that groups functionality also applies to this. So that won't let you see across groups, and you can define groups as geographical locations. You can define another group for supervisory, hierarchy, business unit, org structure. So if groups visibility is supported here, then my answer is yes, you absolutely can prevent how much I can see. So I might be able to add my entire BU in EMEA, but I might not be able to do anything outside of that. Let me confirm how locked down it is today.
Okay. So here I can see who is off, who is not off, etc. Can I see under manager the balance of the people? So the what they have left to take, etc. by item.
Yeah. I'll show. Let's, if it makes sense now, can we move to the manager's view?
Yeah, and then we will have some question on the how you calculate the accruals.
Yeah, we'll get into the accruals too. Yeah, no worries.
Right, so.
Scott,
Yeah.
one question.
Yep.
This is Betty, if you can hear me. So I see at the top you have a couple of options for future book days, today's balance and days. As a user, can I see future accruals?
You can. So this today's, so if I choose this, so let's say I wasn't booking, and I think this is showing me a 2019 summary. If I was booking into next year, when I'm booking that time off into next year, it is taking this information as of January 2020 is taking the future into account. Right.
Okay.
So all of this information on the left-hand side has automatically calculated all your accruals going forward, and it's doing the math to tell you what your balance will be at the time. I know.
Okay,
Good question. Thank you for bringing it up.
And these types, can you have a type of request where you will go through different balances? For example, I want to just take time off and there is toil,
Yep.
vacation, and then you will go through them and exhaust them one by one, or?
So the way we would do that is through a validation rule. So what we can apply to every one of these time off bookings is validation rules. So an example of a validation rule on time off that we have is you can't book time off within 3 days of the actual time off. You want it booked off at least a week ahead of time. So if they try and book it off here, then you tell them, hey, you can't, you validate it. The same logic would apply for a validation rule that says, hey, pull toil first, then pull vacation, then pull unpaid leave, for example. So again, we set up a validation that says, Scott, you can't book. It's not going to automatically go book the toil for them, but it's going to direct the user to do it because you want them to do it. It'll direct the user, hey, Scott, this request can't be submitted. You still have a toil balance, and they'd have to go in. The one I'll call out the big challenge with that is now they've got multiple requests.
Right, so they had 4 hours toil and
They
they
would-
were gonna take 3 days, they had to
Yes.
do 4 hours first. And then
Yes. Yeah, that's the way the system's set up.
So you can't say I'm taking 3 days and
The
then I
system.
tick, I want one, of which one
Well,
day
from
of
it,
these, 2
no.
days, it's one by one.
Yeah, it's one, you've got one, each request has a single bucket associated with it.
Okay.
Yep.
and then I can only have rules to tell them, well, no, you need to empty first that balance before you pick into that balance. It's not done automatically.
Correct. That is correct. Yep.
Quick question.
Go
If
ahead.
somebody works 8 hours overtime, do they have the option to then decide if they can take that as toil?
They absolutely do. Let's look at that before we go to the manager's view, because I have it set up here for my UK user. I want to show you what that interaction looks like. I believe so. And that was Joe asking the question?
Yes.
Yes, it was.
Okay, I'm just
Gosh, good
putting
ear.
voices to names.
Good ear.
Great. So I've set up time off, and so I've created some, big hour drops here to get some overtime on the timesheet. And I've configured time off in lieu of pay here, allowing the user to determine, in this case, how many hours they'd like to get paid out on versus deposit into their toil account. You're defining all of these elements. Maybe you don't give them the opportunity to elect. Maybe you distribute it to a different time off type that they already have. You determine the rate. But that's what the interface would look like in that situation. And it's basing it on the overtime that's on their timesheet for that day.
Great, thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, so I was asking Sylvie, so in France, what we do is for some type of leave, people have only one leave they can choose of, and behind it's the tool itself which says, okay, I'm taking first of that balance and then of that balance, etc. It's not the user who decides. So he says, I'm on leave, and then we have a routine behind that takes it off, each balance in order of priority that we want to empty them. Is that possible?
Does it do it real time, or does it do it after? Does it happen nightly or something like that?
Or real time. On voit tout de suite qu'il l'a pris ou il fait le calcul après? Non, it's real time.
Real time.
In Canada, it's set up where they just say, I'm gonna take 5 days time off. They can request sick and other ones.
Yeah.
Time off will go and say, the employee or the manager might not necessarily know what is going to happen, but the moment it hits the day, then it goes toil. They have different toils in the vacation.
So there's,
and then it goes to vacation unpaid.
Right. So there it's not real time. It sounds like the day of.
Well, but they have a different system.
I know. Right. So again, could be done, but it would be custom work behind the interface to go in and figure out how these should be distributed. In that case, the challenge with that is the users aren't going to see real-time balances in the system.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah. Let me have a think on it.
Okay.
But I think it's no right now.
Okay.
Let me go back.
Okay, and then in France, we have another thing which is called the saving plan.
Okay.
So if you have not taken all your days off of the year, you're allowed to put them on a leave saving plan. So not all of them, some of them. So at the end of the year, I've got 10 days left, and I can take some of these days depending on some rules. Yeah. I can put them in a saving plan so that I will be able to take them on next year or any year later, or get paid depending on the type of leave I'm putting in my saving plan. Some I can get paid, some I can only take later. And I have like an accrual of my saved days off. Right. And I can, maybe when I leave Technicolor, I can take them all at once and leave earlier.
Got it.
So that's something that can be built into the tool.
It can. So couple questions there. The answer is yes to supporting a carryover. We would call it a carryover. So at the end of the year, you still got X number of days left. We can build the system to support you carrying over X number of days.
It's not really a carryover. You're not allowed to carry over days to the following year. Okay. You're only allowed to save them in a dedicated days of saving plan that we will be able. So it's not really carryover, because carryover is not allowed in France.
How is that? So, okay, and
So it's really like a saving account. It's a separate account. It's not a real.
Is this just a way to
carryover
is this
asset.
just a way to get around the carryover, or is this something that's?
Well, it's allowed, right? I mean, we have it's part of the collective agreement we have. So it's a negotiation we have with the unions, right? But
So it just goes into another bucket.
Right.
Another balance.
yeah.
Oh, that's fine. We can have those hours carry over into the same. We can have them. Sorry, not carry over. We can have them move into another bucket. So they can't carry them over to the same code. We
Exactly.
can have them move into another code.
Exactly.
Okay. Yes.
Which has some rules. Some can get paid. Some cannot get paid.
Yep.
So you have a lot of specificities.
So we have some complexity around that in some of the Eastern European countries as well that we set up with, I want to say Poland and Czechoslovakia, around kind of annual buyouts. Let me confirm if that functionality will serve purpose for this. The concept of the concept of banks, the concept of not carryover, the concept of moving and taking a year-end balance and doing something with it, that exists in the system. We'll see that when we look at some of the setup of accrual rules on these profiles. So let me validate how we would solve that problem.
And it's an action from the employee. So I have to decide I'm taking this amount of days, I'm moving them to my leave bank.
Yeah, I'm getting paid on that.
And then I can use them later when I retire, when I leave, I can get paid, I can.
Can they, when they're putting in a time off request, can they use those days before they leave, before they end their job? Yeah.
There are some rules when you can use them, but yeah, you can take it, instead of taking in your paid leaves, you can take out of your bank if you want to.
Is that in the CBA that you sent over to Chris, or is it a different
yes.
one? Okay.
Ils sont des CET dans ce que tu m'as donné. Yes, yes,
Perfect.
it is, yeah.
Perfect. So that I'll look at that, get it translated, and use that as my source.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the French time off is probably one of the most complicated we have.
I don't disagree.
So if you can build that, you should be fine in other countries, but
I'll use that as the gold standard.
I'm sorry, but after the first possible implementation, we have the need to create some different bank for example, working time or overtime, because maybe next year I will decide for some of my employees in France. I don't want to organize overtime at the end of each week. But for this population, maybe only 30 of them. I will decide that now overtime it will be organized each 13 weeks.
Every quarter, okay.
For time 1352. Perfect. Yeah. So is it possible to create a really different kind of bank to recognize overtime, for example, if I decide to create some flexibility of the management of the working time division?
Yeah, so what we can do and what we've done in that situation is, I believe, similar to the toil example that I showed for the UK. So their overtime would automatically be getting banked over a period of a quarter. And then we would have to expose that bank for pay purposes after 13 weeks for them to say, hey, I'd like to buy it out. And we can turn that on for subsets of individuals.
If we can configure all different time, different bank, because your bank is really flexible. It should be possible. No?
There's no, like every piece of that toil, time off, and lieu functionality can be defined separately. So we can have time go to one bank or another bank, depending on the user, depending on the location, depending on the payroll. So yes.
Perfect. We not be stuck by the choices. For one time we decide.
No, not at all. Like once I see the question. So yes, once you define it once, doesn't mean it can't change or.
Well, the question is how difficult is it to change, right? Because do we have to call you back in each time and pay some development days and etc. Is it an easy setup? How autonomous are we in building all these different rules?
We, from a rules perspective, we are leveraging the system 100% for all of the rules definitions, all of the, every time we're talking about maybe a custom banking situation or custom validation rule, all of that is being done in the system, right? Through the web interface, right? What that means is, yes, as part of your support agreement, we can do it for you. And if it's something, you know, big and complex, and you don't want us to take on that work, you have resources that can go in and change the parameters. Those parameters are exposed to your group as well to go in and change. Everything that, all the config and all the setup done by our implementation teams is done through the interface. We don't have a special tools that we use. It's all done here. So that means everything that can be done, you can do through this interface.
Can rules be configured where some companies don't like to pay overtime, like if they leave 5 minutes after, so it goes to a bucket. And then the next day, if they work 5 minutes less, it pays from that bucket the complete 8 hours.
Yeah, so what we would do is we would look at putting that, we would bank that into a toil bank for those 35 minutes over, and it would look at it over the period of the week. Or you define what that period is, we would normalize
It would be
that.
automatic.
Exactly. The user doesn't have to do anything. Like we see here, a user is choosing to select it, but the system knows that user's schedule, so I know how much overtime is there. And we're giving the user a choice here, but that's not required. We can just simply say, hey, we're banking this so that at the end of the week, it balances out to 40. Yeah. Question?
No, it's okay.
Sorry, may I just ask Florian, the scenario you just described where the overtime is potentially saved into a different bucket.
Yes.
Are you thinking of the impact of the utilization platform for advertising and the fact you're thinking that because
On next year, maybe I will hop on this kind of negotiation with
yes,
unions.
yeah,
And maybe we decided to have a different period to recognize overtime.
Yes.
If I just apply the law, it's okay each week, but maybe we want to change, and each 4 weeks, or maybe each 13 weeks, or maybe in a year.
Yeah.
So it could change. So after, if you have a talk, okay, you ask you, I will request, and if you tell me it's okay, 6 months to make the new organization of the working time. Okay, 6 months is perfect. Our difficulty sometimes that we have currently is, okay, the partner will say, okay, it's 6 months, and after 1 year,
oh wow,
it's a big problem sometimes.
So I'll say this: I've never seen a 6 month delivery for our existing customers. They're weeks, right? And it's not 24 weeks. It's 3 to 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just for context then, so there's a small advertising team here that would be impacted by the utilization phase 1, as we call it, for advertising. The challenge, I think, here we're talking about time and attendance platform. We're not talking about it in that context. So there'd have to be some bridge, you know, if we don't have a time and attendance platform on Replicon.
Yeah, that's true. But I really like bank systems. So I like to trade bank systems. So I want to be free to create a lot of bank if possible.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So are there notifications where, for example, in Canada, when there is a holiday, start the holiday, and they work, it goes into toil.
Yes.
But they have to use it in 3 weeks.
So expiry, we would call that expiry in our system.
Notified in advance so they have to take it, or it just expires and they lose it? Because they can lose it, they just have to use it.
Some nice hard questions for Scott.
So I believe we addressed that with scheduled report. So basically, we can schedule a report that says, hey, Scott, you've got bank time that's about to expire on Friday the 31st.
Like an exception report.
You've got it. Got it. Okay. Okay. Supervisor's view, what they're seeing. Okay. Let me log back in. So this is Richard Anderson. he supervises several different employees. The supervisory view is really really similar. So he is also a timesheet user, so he has a couple of tabs here, but the tab up here in the upper right hand corner is the one that's different. That's the team tab. He's a team leader, he's a supervisor, so he has a tab that other people don't. It's permission based. The first tab that he sees from the team tab is his outstanding approvals. It's badged, the big orange 27 there. He's got 27 things outstanding. Looks a lot like my Replicon system for my team because I've not logged in a little bit. But what's also happened here is before Richard even logs into the system, is Richard got a notification on his phone. It was a push notification, and he could have just dropped right into the product and seen all of these approvals on a mobile device. He's also gotten an email with a link in it. Clicking that link will take him directly into the application to this page and potentially authenticate him. So he can make those approvals here as well from an email notification. And he's presented with a page that has all his approvals in one place. Timesheet approvals up top. Down below, I think we've got time off approvals or bookings that are waiting for approval. And before we talk about that, I should also talk about the flexibility about who approves it, right? So Richard is these users' supervisor, but we support multiple approvers. So it could go to Richard first and then to payroll. It could go to Richard, Scott, 10 other people, and then payroll. And there's logic built into that workflow. So we actually have workflow conditions that say, hey, send it to Scott first. If Scott doesn't action it fast enough and he doesn't actually approve it within 2 weeks, a week, whatever you define, then take it on to the next manager, the next supervisor, depending on how you want to define that logic. We can also look at the type of time off booking to define how it flows through that approval path. Maybe there's some privacy concerns around the type of time off that users are taking that supervisors don't need to see. We can route those time off requests differently on a time off by time off basis. Okay. Any way that it happens, it will end up in a supervisor's bucket like we're seeing here. And the supervisor then just has to drill in and look at, for example, we'll look at Tammy Benson's timesheet. Maybe I'm okay with what I see here. I'm seeing all the time that has been entered. I'm seeing how much of that is payroll time. Looks like she has 42 regular hours. I can drill in and look at Tammy's timesheet and see what it's related to, or I can approve right from here. What I'm likely going to do is look through my list and see if a user has hours that don't make sense to me. James Woods down here at the bottom. If I click James Woods' name, it's going to bring up his timesheet for me. Oh, I think this is the one. Let's see, is it? Oh, it is the timesheet I want to show you guys. Perfect. So I click into James' timesheet, and we see a couple of things. We can see a notice. We can see a warning. These are just examples of information back to user. It's key to make sure that these timesheets are clean when they get there. I see his punches. So these look like they probably correspond to clock-ins from a badge swipe that happened at a door or a security system. Maybe it was our clock device, but it's when he came in and when he left. Those could have breaks as well in this upper block section of punches. Then at the end of the week, what he's done is he's come in and said, hey, what work hours, what projects and work hours are these distributed to? The demo data hasn't distributed them to specific projects, but that's what he's doing here. He's distributing the hours for the day down to specific projects and tasks, and then it's counting down. So this first row says work hours not distributed. Make sure that all of his hours that he's clocked in for are allocated to tasks and projects throughout the system. And then down at the bottom, what you see is comments related to it. And then even below that, we see approval history. So everything is audited in the system. This is like a mini audit trail. This is going to show when it was submitted. It's going to show historical approvers. Maybe it's reopened and resubmitted. All of those transactions will exist here. And I'm seeing this as an approver, and the user would see that as well. Okay.
Where do they enter the task? Sorry, I didn't see.
So this is a read-only timesheet. What he should have done, and I will still set this up on the break, is he'll actually have the ability to select the tasks here. Yeah. He didn't, but that's where the task selection will occur for him as
So the way it works when you use both the HR part and the business part, let's call it this way, you enter first your time the hours worked, and then you allocate them to tasks?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
The other mechanism is that you use that, remember that punch interface where we had a transfer button? You could use the transfer button and choose a different project there, which would be similar. But again, then you're doing it every time you change projects.
In the as in this timesheet, can the hours be pre-populated with the schedule?
Yes.
And
they
then I can go and do it without.
Yes.
anything.
Yes.
Same as works.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So as an approver now, I'm looking at this timesheet. I like the way it looks. I can then approve or reject it. And in both situations, it prompts me for comments. These comments go back to the user. The user can see it. He'll be notified again from my mobile, from email, and I'll know that I have to go in and change something. And that's all facilitated and documented from an audit trail perspective at the bottom of the timesheet.
Just relating to, sorry, pre-population, and correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, as well.
Oh, sure.
But there's, and I'm sure you will. But relating to, there's kind of 3 different kind of segments in terms of how far you go with that. So it could be kind of the clock in, clock outs based on schedule. It could be a selection of projects without the time. It could be the projects with the time as well. So there's different levels of the way that you can pre-populate the timesheet as well.
So we populate the projects from last week or whatever.
Yes, depends on what you want to see. Yeah, but it might not have the core, the bulk hours in. So you've got kind of different ways and different levels of pre-population, which you might want for different teams as well.
And the list of tasks can be changed on a weekly basis, individual basis as well, right? And it's easy because what we would like to avoid is people allocate tasks to that they should not even be allocating tasks to.
Right.
And well, typically in the advertising business, you know, it's very small projects, so it changes a lot.
Yep.
So it's easy to make sure that people can pick from the right list of tasks.
So yes, because the system supports assignments. So we wouldn't ask you to manage that through this interface though. We'll take a feed for those tasks and those projects so that, and assign them to the right person. So Chris sees.
On a weekly basis, you're gonna have a feed
We have customers that do it on a daily basis.
already.
Yes.
Yeah, we would just, it can even be real time if we're using APIs. It's whatever the source system is. We would just be pulling it in task specific to users as long as the source system's doing the assignment.
Yeah.
Yep.
Manager access, is there a possible download? Can I download that in Excel?
Through reporting.
Yeah.
You'd have to do it through reporting. You could, and again,
I can't come here where I have all my approval and do a download?
no, not today. What? Tell me why.
Some of our managers have 300 reports.
Okay. What are they gonna? So what do they do when they download it?
Well, because you put it in Excel, you check everyone, because here you have to click on every employee to see the detail.
Okay.
So if I could download everything, including the detail in Excel, I would see everything. I would say everyone is fine, would come back here and approve.
Okay. So again, I think what we would do, and we'll see reporting too. I would go in reporting. I would configure that report. We can schedule that report so that on the Saturday everything has to be done, and a report goes to me that says, here's all your users, here's all the details. Anything look fishy here? No. They come to this screen, they select all, and they're good.
Okay.
Yep.
And you were saying earlier that we can see the balance of our people as well in terms of time off. You know,
That is correct.
To see how many.
That's correct. So
That's one, especially because we're trying to avoid the carryover. So our managers are supposed to be responsible to push their people to take that time off. So they need to see the balance.
So I went to my time off tab now. So I'm on my team tab. So this isn't my personal time off. So go to team. I go to time off. I've got it. This calendar now by default will just show my direct reports, right? And right here, I see all of my team's balances. Let me add one. So you can add as many of your time off types for your users. It stays here. You can filter this list for specific countries, specific employee types that you want to look for, and I can see their balances. Then, if I want details around, whoa, why is Sally negative 56? I can click her name and see all of her other balances, and I can see, oh, this is what's causing it. You could drill in. Now you'll see that same transactional model that the HR person saw. So you can have the conversation as a supervisor. It never gets to HR.
And there is another thing we track as well in our time system is working from home.
Okay.
So it's not a day off as such, but
Right.
we ask our employees to come to the system and tell us that tomorrow they're going to work from home.
Yep.
So we can track how many days they work from home,
Yep.
and we can be covered from an insurance standpoint and
Yep.
so on. Is that possible as well?
What we see customers doing there, we don't have out of the box functionality to do it. What we do is use a time off type called work from home.
Okay.
Goes through an approval process, and then what we do is we disregard it from a
Oh,
pay
payroll.
calcs and payroll. So that should work.
Okay, and so payroll interface, do you have, so obviously we use different payroll providers around the world. We have ADP in quite a few countries, different versions of ADP, obviously.
Yeah.
We have, what is it called again? SD Works in France. We have, well, we're going to have ADP in India. We may move to another provider in Canada next year. So do you come with payroll interface that we can use and just adapt? Do we have to build every payroll interface from scratch? How does that work?
Yeah, no, here's the good news. Every one of those payroll interfaces probably has 95% of the same information in it, and it's just different columns in different places for the most part. I already have pre-existing interfaces to ADP, multiple versions of Ceridian, Workday, SD Works, I think, is in the list as well. But again, so we've got 20 years of payroll extracts that you probably have it already. So we can leverage those. You don't have to have one in the system. You can have 10, 20 of them in the system, and you're choosing that payroll provider when you extract the data from the payroll workbench. So you'll choose the location, you'll choose the right payroll provider, and that formats it. And then you take that data out, and you shouldn't have to rewrite any of these significantly during the implementation.
Do you have a payroll module?
For us to calculate net, no. So we are sourced to gross.
Scott, I have a question here. This Santosh here from Bangalore.
Okay, go ahead.
So in terms of rules and validation set up with systems, so we have a fairly complex ruling and validations that we have set up in our current system, depending on what the business requires. First, keeping in consideration what the rule of the land says, and then customizing it around the rules of the land, depending on the business or depending on the legal entity that we support. So first the country rules come in, then the state laws come in, then the entity rules come in, and then the business rules come in. So what I mean to say is that, for example, we have rules that we have set up in the system that if a manager does not approve a certain leave within a certain specific amount of time, it gets auto-approved. We have rules set up for an employee. One is an accrued leaves that happen by design, depending on the type of leave that we provision it to him or her. And then we have another approval depending on whether they have earned that leave or no. For example, if somebody works on their weekly off or on a company declared holiday, then they're eligible for time off in lieu. However, they need to apply for that in the system, which a manager needs to validate if they have indeed if the manager did want them to work on a day that they're not supposed to be working. And second, if the hours, correspond with their current timesheet that they submit outside. However, the system controls that. The system would allow an employee to apply for time off in lieu only if they have worked on the calendar that is already published within the system, within the leave and attendance calendar. So that, they don't get to apply for time off in lieu on their regular working days.
Right.
And then we have a lot of other things that we manage in terms of leave provisioning, and we have actuarial valuations that we do because that needs to flow into our books of accounts at the end of the year, or rather at the end of every quarter. So we have then created rules around how long a manager gets to approve a certain leave type, how long an employee gets to apply for a certain leave type. We get a lot of reports that come off from there because then those are the reports that are fed into the payroll system. So how easy it is for us to configure these rules not only from a country point of view, but also drilling down to the business unit that we service to. And we have about 7 or 8 different business units that we service here.
Okay, so let me show you how it probably makes sense for us to take a look and peel back the UK or the French setup that I've done in the system, kind of show you how those rules are applied and how they can be modified. Because I think that will answer your question. There was a lot of information in that question, so we may have to have a conversation post this. But let me show you how the system behaves today and what's through the interface, what's at a code level versus a drop down level, and hopefully that answers your question. And if it doesn't, we can have a more deep dive into those specific rules, and we can walk through each of those in the system. So I'm logged in administratively, Santosh, and what I'm going to do is just cover off a couple of areas that we set up some validation rules specific to France and the UK to leverage what we were seeing on the timesheet for validation.
A question about the manager.
Oh, yes. Yeah, for sure.
Well,
yeah, go ahead. Ask a manager question before we move to admin.
Right. So I'm assuming the employee, for example, doesn't show up today or got sick or whatever, and the manager was not a time of request. The manager can enter the pay code.
Yes.
In the time card.
Yeah.
For example, vacation.
Yep. So that shared time off calendar that I was looking at, I can do a time off for all of my team there.
So you recommend to do a time off instead of entering a pay code directly in the time card?
Yep, because sick time we would take as a time off type in our system, because we do treat actual work as different from non-work hours. Sick time for us is a non-work hour.
Let's say vacation.
Okay, yep, vacation.
Is there a way to enter it directly in the time card? Or?
There's a button on the time card that says book time off. And so again,
but it will do a request.
Right, our object, it will create a time off. Always come back to that time off object in our system.
That's fine.
Okay. The other thing I'll talk about is that if you wanted the supervisor to do something on behalf of the user, that's permission based as well. So I could go to that user's timesheet and edit it potentially, add hours to a task, to something else, pre-populate it, submit it on their behalf. The system is auditing that I'm doing it on their behalf. So it doesn't look like the user did it. Everything's audited as on behalf of Scott by Chris.
Are there any pay codes we can enter directly in the time card? Or do you allow?
We can. So right now, all of the logic we've been looking at is auto calculating, but we do have customers that say, hey, listen, I don't have any logic. I don't follow stat. I want my employees to enter the pay code or enter some identifier that tells us what pay code to use. We can prompt them for a pay code on the timesheet as well, directly.
No,
Is that what you're asking?
Well, no, I was gonna have a follow-up question, but I think if we force the manager to always to enter a request and not enter a pay code, then my question doesn't apply. I think I like it.
Okay. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So,
okay. Okay, good. Any other supervisory questions about the manager access interaction? Any questions on the phone about supervisors?
She has a question. Yes.
Okay.
For the employee profile, the employee profile is automatically configured. We don't need to add or time.
Yes.
Or
So-
write day off or something
Yeah.
else.
So that came up last week as well, and we wouldn't see you editing the users in editing the users in the system at all. All of the user information associated, I'm going to go into this French user profile. All of this information should be sourced from your system of record in those specific geographies. That may be multiple systems that are feeding this, but what we do is we populate and map over the fields that make sense. So username, first name, etc., what we need. And then the other thing we do is we look at attributes of the source system to figure out what else we need to give them. Permissions, what overtime rule do they need to get, what is their schedule. And so what we would typically do is set up a template user inside the system that would be whatever the lowest granularity is. Maybe it's sales individuals located in the UK, We create a template user for sales in the UK. And then every time we identify a sales from the UK user coming in, it says, oh, what permissions do I give them? What rules do I give them? What time off accrual types do I give them? And then it uses that template user to do that. Does that make sense? Yeah. And that applies to everything, not just users in the system. So the schedules, potentially if there was information contributing to that, projects, tasks, assignments, everything that is available externally that we can import, we will, because we don't want any double entry from an implementation perspective.
And so we can program everything ourselves, right? So in each country, I'm going to have different type of leaves. So I can say in France, people accrue 2.5 days a month of that type of leave. They accrue whatever 10 days upfront for the entire year of whatever type of leave.
Yeah.
In some countries, I have some accruals on sick leaves. So I can program all of that for every country myself, and then the system will accrue everything automatically.
Yeah, so and since we're in the user profile, we'll get to the validation rules as well. We're going to start at the user level. I've gone into the time off section of this user. So this time off, this user has access to all of the French defaults that I've set up in the system. I've set up a starting balance for some of these, but I can set up an accrual the same way. An accrual, for example, for this annual leave, you give it the yearly entitlement, it figures out what it needs to accrue monthly. From a configuration perspective, there is significant options from an accruals perspective. So we can accrue based on hours worked, we can accrue based on age, which is actually a rule in Norway, compensatory time off, percentage of hours worked in a leave year. These really, this library has been created based on our global implementations. So what you get to take advantage of is all of the countries that we're live in, we've probably come across those use cases, and they exist now as accrual rules. And we're going to see the same thing when we get to validation rules in a second. Okay. Now, these are the predefined accrual rules. We have predefined validations, predefined accruals, predefined pay rules. All of these, if none of these are going to meet your needs, we have the ability to create new elements that sit in this library now, and we expose to other customers and you to take advantage of. Okay. What else I want to talk about accrual-wise? Limitations, same thing. These are resets, carryovers. How much are we going to cap accruals? Again, all configurable on a type-by-type basis, country-by-country basis, user, business unit basis. And you can even have exceptions right down to the end user. If there's somebody you need to top up for some specific reason, it won't affect everybody in the system. Okay. The other thing is effective dating. So all of these only have one layer of accrual logic or cap logic, but all the time off policies come with effective dating. So I can essentially add and auto generate, you define the policy at the policy level, and then as you add a new employee to the system, it can generate all of their accrual changes for the lifetime of their journey through your organization. So if after 5 years their accrual changes to something else, you can pre-program that into the system, and it'll automatically create the accruals, and it'll automatically start calculating that into the future. There's nothing you need to do.
With that effective date, I guess, I don't know, Paul, that could come straight from the HR online feed, couldn't it?
Typically, it's more from the payroll feed. But,
all right. Okay.
Yeah, but anyway, yeah, I mean, I think it's a difference between what's the master system of record for accrual balances, and it's kind of on a country by country basis.
That is the other thing, to maximize the value of that time off information in the Replicon system. We need to know this accrual information, because that's how we calculate it going into the future and give you that transaction record and that history. So we would vie for having that in our system during the implementation.
So
go ahead.
Do you support contract dates on this accrual?
Meaning,
for example, in you get 40 hours sick, for example.
Yep.
Every January.
Yep.
Then if they start, well, one example will be they start in February. It has to prorate it, right?
Oh, yeah.
And give less than 40.
Yeah.
But also, and I see you have here something to prorate, so
Yep.
that might take care of it. But
Yep.
what about some employee the contract ends on July?
Yep.
Will that also prorate with the contract ending?
Yeah, so it actually, our system will prorate at the start and end of the contract. So if they leave, so it's 80 days a year and they start in February, it'll give them less than 80. And if they leave, before November, it'll cut hours off the back of that.
Well, let's say we already know the contract date is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So it will in advance populate less because they know.
Right. So basically what you would have here is you got a policy effective, in this case, their user will be February 1st.
Right.
You're going to say, hey, prorate this at the start and the end of the policy. Then you're going to have another one that basically says effective, November 28th, whatever it may be, they get nothing. So the system knows to prorate that yearly amount based on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then if that changes, if the contract changes,
then all you have to do is come in
it will
here and
react.
dump this, change this date, dump this record out, completely become a full-time employee, or they don't.
And yeah, and this will be taken care of by an interface from.
I would hope. Yep, I would hope. Okay. Yeah, again, I'm showing you all of these things not to show you all of the work you need to do in our system. It's to show you the flexibility and the capability. Okay. Nobody expects this data to be entered in the Replicon tool. Now we dove into the user's profile. I do want to look at some of the validations that are applied directly to the user's profile that we'll go take a look at. Yes, I'm leaving. That we'll go take a look at from a setup perspective. One of those is a punch entry policy. We'll go see where those are set up and defined. Punch entry policies define what happens at the clock if I'm early, what happens in the clock if I'm not scheduled to work that day, how do we round that time at the punch? Do we round it to the schedule? Those types of things. At the timesheet, from a timesheet perspective, we determine the template. So this user has the France template set up, which means we're capturing start and stop times. We've got some rest break logic applied. I'll show you where that's done. We've got overtime calculations applied. I think overtime caps are UK, but we'll take a look at the validations that happen there. This is just the user attribution. So none of the, basically bolt on all the validations in the next section we'll look at. And then time off, again, you're templating time off from a view perspective, and what can the user do from a time off tool. Schedule says, hey, is this user an office schedule where they work 8 hours Sunday and Saturday off and you define their days off? Or is this more of a shift schedule where you've got, Santos, to your point, you've got 20-hour rotations where you've got people coming in on shifts? We would change and edit this schedule type to reflect a shift type schedule if that was the case. Okay. And then the system simply looks in a different location to understand auto population, validations, overtime calculations, etc. Okay. While I'm on the user record, I will speak to the audit log. So as you're changing things on the user profile, the system is logging all of those changes. I haven't made any changes to this user today, but every user, there's a full audit of all the changes that have happened, who made the change, where were they. This is a Sarbanes-Oxley type capability.
Excuse me, Scott, I just wanted to ask, it's been a long time, we're all talking. Does anyone need a break or?
No, we have a lot of people on the call, so if we can continue, it's better, especially it's getting late in India, so
sure.
if you're okay, but
I'm fine.
you're the one talking. So.
No, I'm fine.
There was such a flow, I couldn't interrupt any time, so I thought about
I'm sorry.
No.
Please, if anybody else feels like that, don't interrupt all you want.
We can try to wrap up, in a.
Yeah. So the really we attribute things to the user, but we define them at the group or unit level. And if I go into that timesheet template where we're defining all the different types of timesheets. There's the France template that I set up, but you create the view of the user. Like some users, you'll have the grid distribution like we saw. Some will have in and out, some will be punch. You're defining those as templates. Now the templates aren't just what the user sees. Go into France. Not just what the user sees, it's also what can the owner of the timesheet do from a permissions perspective. What they see is these UI elements, and there's some tweaks that you can apply to each of the UI type of elements that you see. You can add different UI components, lots of different options here. Attestation. I heard somebody talk about the schedule showing up for the user. You actually populate the schedule over top of their timesheet so they can see what they're scheduled to do and they still have to enter it, or we can pre-pop. There's notices, there's daily OEFs that you can have there if you're capturing information over and above time. Validations, these are the validations we stack for France specifically. Average workday hours in a rolling period. I think we have to look back several weeks. Meal break enforcement over 20-minute break in 6 hours of work. Daily rest period. Custom configurable daily, weekly rest period again. So that's the break between shifts within the system. Those are all validations that we simply add to the French template. So now what we've seen is the user just gets the template. This template gets these validations stacked on it with some UI. Then we've also got workflow conditions. And these are things that are going to drive the behavior of the timesheet. They have to accept attestation. Don't let them submit it early. Don't let them go back farther than 2 weeks. Don't let them go ahead farther than a week. All of these workflow settings are designed at implementation, and we put those in the system, and you have choices to make there. But if I leave this template profile now, you'll see that those elements also have configuration. So we saw validation rules stacked up there, right? So if I go to timesheet validation rules, now we see all of the potential timesheet validation rules in the system. Above scheduled hours, one, let's click on that. So make sure that they don't exceed their schedule. Go into each one of these validation rules. Now you're faced with all of these parameters. Remember we talked about how easy or hard are these to change? You get down to this level of granularity and you have access to change all of these elements. Change the language that shows up from a validation perspective. I want it to say something else. You can determine the wage types that are excluded. Again, there may be a situation, two situations that come up. You say, listen, you guys don't have a validation I need. We need to take that on as part of the implementation and deliver before the implementation is complete. And take that into consideration when we're talking about implementation costs. And we do it, we expose it here for you to take advantage of. Or maybe it's like, I just need an additional parameter. I don't need my own custom rule. Those things are viable and happen in every implementation. And this is where we take care of that, okay? Coming back out to the administration. It doesn't just apply to time off. So time off templates kind of mirror the same capability that you would have on a timesheet basis, only it's just for time off capabilities. You define a template, you define the functionalities that a user is going to have on a time off basis, seeing other people's calendars, seeing custom fields, again, all through the interface, editable by you, editable by Replicon employees. I'll take one more look at payrolls. Again, how you want to round your punches, how we want to allocate those punches. That's all determined by you from a setup and compliance perspective, and then payrolls as well. And we took a look at these briefly.
Can you round durations?
We can round durations, and we can round them on the punch. We can round them, or we can round them just when the users are putting in those times to what you would prefer them to be. Do you round any today?
We might have any, for example, if someone entered 8.1 hours.
Yeah, and you want to go to 8. Yeah. So that's supported. We also have complexity around, where are you? Rounding punches and details around, hey, do I want to round it differently at the start of my shift or the end of my shift? What increment do I want to round to? Or do I want to, again, apply some custom logic to rounding and define how it should behave? Maybe 15 minutes before my schedule, I round to, and then I round back if you're up to 10 minutes after my schedule. Those are all customer existing scripts that we have today. So again, rounding is baked into the system from a selection perspective, no custom coding needed.
Yeah, but without punches, right? I mean, my question
You
was-
can round just the hours. Yeah, 8 to 8.1, yes, that as well. Okay. Yeah. I always ask the question, are people trying to put in more information than they need to, or is it an accident? Are we validating it from a data entry perspective, or is there a business reason around that?
Well, I guess yeah, there is one, because we have a site that they enter durations.
Yep.
They're only allowed to enter 15-minute increments.
Okay, got it.
But the question would be, can you prevent them from entering something that is not 15 minutes, or just round it?
Yes.
That would be another solution, not to let them enter.
So we use a snap too. So in the timesheet templates, there's a checkbox that says snap to the quarter hour, which is what we would use for that.
Or can you give them an error message saying you cannot enter it?
Yes, we can use a validation that says, hey, you've
Okay,
entered
maybe
something
that's
that
better, so-
isn't a 15-minute, and then it forces them to make the change. Snapping can be tricky. They average it out correctly. They can get extra pay every day over time.
Hey, Scott, just thinking about kind of wrapping this, perhaps, Odd, if your team have any things that are, that you can flagging or that need to be flagged, before.
Yeah. So I think definitely we need to zoom a little bit more on the time off part. That's the part I'm the most worried about. I'm not worried actually, but I need to be convinced that it's doable. I think if you manage to look at what I sent you for France, I think that would be great if we can dig into that.
Okay.
Now, for sure, the user interface, especially on task allocation, I'm just a bit worried that, the fact that you have to add a new line each time. So from 9 to 10, I worked on these tasks, from 10 to 11, instead of having something more easy, drag and drop. For a lot of our population, it's not really the HR part. I'm stepping on Dominique's toes, but for a lot of population, it's going to be a big change to have to allocate time to tasks. And if it's too complicated, I don't know how much, that's going to be the change management is probably going to be a bit difficult.
Yeah.
Especially we saw that field. So I guess it's the same question as the one you got in the US. So I have my timing at the top. I say, I worked 9 hours today, and then I allocate these 9 hours to tasks. What would that look like?
Yep.
And the field you showed us seems to be very short.
I'll show you.
And in some cases, a list of tasks can be quite long.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do this. I need to add some utilization products to show what this will end up looking like, but that's fine. Let me do that. Bear with me. Okay. We're going off the reservation now. We're getting out of the demo, guys. We add some products.
Yeah, okay, do you want me to suggest
Okay. Great. Okay, so here's an example of a distribution, right?
Okay.
So this is a quick way to show you, and I hope this makes it easier. So I'm assuming that above this, I've got a bunch of punches that I've done. Fair statement. So at the end of the week, I've come down here and now I've got 40 hours that I need to allocate to different things. Okay. So this user, first of all, comes down here and they click in and they see projects, they can drill in, they see task, done. I did 8 hours to that on Monday for this project. I also did project, task. Tuesday, I did 8 hours for that. Maybe it's 4, maybe it's 2. We can add as many as we need. And I don't have to re-add it if I did the same project on Wednesdays and Thursdays and Fridays.
Okay,
So
so
now,
you can allocate your time on the entire week. Okay.
yes. So if I know a code, I know some element of that name, I can just simply start typing. And the system's going to find what it is I need, ask me for a task, and then I can go ahead and ask me for task, and I can go ahead and put that in. And again, it's the interface for the complexity of this project task, based on the complexity of this project task selection, people do appreciate. I haven't seen the one you're referring to. Like you say you already have a system today where it's drag and drop.
Yeah.
If you can share that, a view of that with us, I mean, I'm happy to take it into consideration and see if there's something that we should be thinking about, unless it's proprietary to Technicolor. I would love the opportunity to see it. But again, does that look like an intuitive interface for?
Well, I'm not going to do it, so
Okay.
I mean, I hope.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, you guys know your Florian. You think it's complicated for the advertising people to come and enter this kind of stuff, tasks and time on each task, etc. With adding a new row, I've spent 2 hours on this, etc. From a change standpoint.
I don't think so for contemporary. For contractors, I don't know. That's the only one.
No, but for the employees, no.
Are you thinking advertising? This drag and drop and everything. Just thinking specifically that group.
Well, I mean, advertising to start with because they are the pilot, right? But if you look at what they have, for example, in Shotgun, with the drag and drop, etc., it's really, yeah. So the advertising people is very new to them, right? To start, entering these kind of details. So, but it's okay. I mean, I think it's just a change management.
Yeah.
Would we assume, Maud, as well, would there be a level of pre-population at all for that team? So it'd be more of a refine and then submit, as opposed to going through.
If those tasks exist.
No, it's pretty much they have to collect it. They don't pre-populate which tasks they think they're going to spend time on. It's basically they pull from a list because they never know day by day what they're going to put in.
Yeah, and for a lot of environments, these types of employees are not paid by the day or week, right? They're paid by the hour, and so we would not suggest pre-populating time for that population.
Yeah, so we need to dig into the time of part, see if everything we need to do is possible. One question we have, maybe we misunderstood in terms of user profile.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a lot of people who have different rules.
Sure.
So there is a base that applies to all, and then depending if you're in this location, these legal entities, this whatever, if you're these exempt, non-exempt, then you have additional rules.
Okay.
So we're just worried that maybe we misunderstood. Can we say that this base applies to all, and then by type of user you have some rules applying on top, or do we have to redefine everything for each profile?
Our attribution is at the user level.
It is at the user.
It's a user level. But when we think about that data coming in, there's nothing stopping us from saying, hey, this is your default. This is your default template that applies to everybody. And then we define regional templates that supplement that. But at the end of the day, it all ends up as user attribution.
Okay, but in terms of setup, because that's the part that Sylvie was worried about, is because we have a lot of different profiles. I mean, I'm just looking at France, right? Everyone is, not everyone, but we have a lot of very different population with different rules, etc. And so to have to set the by user, could be quite cumbersome. So if we could have a base that applies, well, probably we would have different layers. So we would have a base that applies to all French people. Then we would have a second layer that applies to every person in a given legal entity.
Right, right. Yep.
And then we would have another layer that is, well, if you're within France and within legal entities, and on
Right.
top you have these
Right.
rules, etc., right? That's probably the way it would work.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go
So
ahead.
like you could use templates, right? I mean, basically, as long as the field that defines the group is within a category of a field in HRO, it could be an interface and utilizing those upload templates to which you're referring, right?
We're talking about the rules here. What rules apply to what profile?
Well, I mean, if there's a rule, I guess for Scott, you're saying like, okay, for all the profiles, if you have all the set rules, it doesn't have to be at the employee level that you configure. I mean, as long as like there's some in HRO that says, okay, you know, if these people have this field value, then coming across in the interface, it could. You wouldn't have to configure at the individual level. It would just be if they have that category, then they get that predefined rule, right?
That's a yes from our side.
Okay. All right. Joe, Santosh, compared to your current systems?
Looks good.
Santosh?
It looks good, odd so far, but we'll have to, you know, as you said, we'll have to assess it a little more deeply to assess what we have right now and what this provides, but it does look like an interesting tool.
Okay, thanks, Jimmy. Okay. All right. Sylvie, France? Comments?
It looks like the future system. I suppose that we must have a savvy plan, must have a lot of check regarding these.
Of course.
Yeah, the time off in France is really complicated. So if we can
We'll
dig down
configure
into
that.
that would be good. Yeah.
We'll
Could be
configure
good
that.
maybe if it's possible because as that you already implemented this kind of tool in France.
Yeah.
Or maybe also for other country.
Yeah.
For each person concerns to have some benchmark of a pre-anonymized configuration to check how it works maybe for scope because we can have an idea how about it works with an standard configuration for executive and non-executive. We can already check by that.
Yeah.
To,
you say you've got customers who are using it in France?
Yes.
Okay. Well, now France is it's less or more or less complex, right? We have, depending on your CBA,
right.
We are on a quite complicated one. Plus, on top of our CBA, we have added some legal entity binding agreements, and then sometimes some sub-legal entities. So we've just made it complicated to make sure we keep our jobs for a long time.
Standard one or anonymized could be perfect for us, of course. But, just to check and to make some tests.
Good.
That's
good. We can facilitate that. And we have that CBA, so we'll use that as our starting point and put that in the system and say, here it is.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, and if we can see some of your customers or who have implemented into our main countries. So good.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right.
Good for me, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't want to bring that to a premature halt, but I know Betty has to dash as well. And if you've been able to ask the questions that you wanted to ask
sure.
at
And
this
I think
stage.
everyone needs to take the time now to think about it, maybe come back with more questions,
For
maybe
sure.
in writing, to see maybe anything we didn't think of. But okay, good.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for
Thank
the
you.
demonstration.
And thanks everybody on the call. Thanks for being late in Bangalore and early in LA.
Very early in LA, yeah.
But I'll close the call now.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank
Dominic.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes.
So we'll just keep the time that you set, which would be 5:30 Paris time for the follow-up.
Yes, unless the Replicon team fall asleep. Okay, bye.
Okay, good. We'll talk to you at 5:30 then. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you.